There are moments in life that split your world in two, the life you had before, and the wreckage left after. For Jennifer Osei, that moment came on a Tuesday morning, in a glass office on the 14th floor, when the man she had trusted with her career looked her in the eyes and said something that would change everything. Not just for her. For him. For his family. And for a secret that had been buried so deep, even the people closest to it had forgotten it was there. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, we'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Jennifer Osei was 28 years old when she got the job at Mensah & Associates, one of the most respected financial consulting firms in Accra, Ghana. She had grown up in Kumasi, the third of 5 children, raised by a mother who sold fabric at the Kajisha market and a father who drove a taxi until his knees gave out. Nobody in her family had ever worked in a glass building. Nobody had ever worn a lanyard with a company logo or taken a lift to the 14th floor of anything. When she walked through those doors for the first time, she carried all of them with her, her mother's tired hands, her father's crooked smile, her younger siblings' faces, wide with hope. She could not afford to fail. She simply could not. She was hired as the executive secretary to the CEO, Mr. Roland Mensah, son of the firm's founder, a man in his mid-40s who wore tailored suits and spoke with the kind of quiet authority that made everyone in a room sit up straighter. He was not unkind in the beginning. He was professional, measured, even generous with praise when her work was excellent, and her work was almost always excellent. Jennifer was meticulous. She remembered every detail, anticipated every need, prepared reports before they were asked for and correspondence before deadlines arrived. Within 3 months, 2 senior partners had privately told Roland that she was the best secretary the firm had ever had. She did not know this. She only knew that she showed up every day, grateful and hungry and determined. Her small apartment in Adabraka had a leaking ceiling she fixed with a bucket, a hot plate she cooked everything on, and a photograph of her family taped above the door. Every evening before she left for work, she touched that photograph. Not for luck, she did not believe much in luck. She touched it to remember why she was doing this. Because some mornings, the commute alone was a kind of war. The trotro packed so tight she arrived with her blouse creased, the heat already pressing in before 9 in the morning, the city loud and indifferent. But she walked into that building every day with her back straight and her mind sharp. Nobody gave her anything. She earned every single step. It was around the 6th month that things began to shift, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the way a tide pulls sand from beneath your feet before you realize the ground has moved. Mr. Roland began requesting her presence during after-hours meetings. At first, there were other staff members present. Then there were fewer. Then it was just the 2 of them, working late over financial projections and client proposals while the rest of the office emptied out floor by floor. She told herself it was because she was efficient. Because he trusted her work. She needed that to be true, so she allowed herself to believe it. The first comment came in the 7th month. It was small enough to dismiss. He told her she looked very beautiful today, while handing back a document she had prepared. She smiled politely, said thank you, and returned to her desk. She told no one. What was there to tell? He said she looked beautiful. People say things. But the comment sat in the back of her mind like a pebble in a shoe, small, but impossible to ignore completely. Think about someone you respect at work, someone whose approval matters to your career, and imagine that person beginning to look at you differently. Would you say something? Or would you stay quiet and hope you were imagining it? By the 8th month, the comments had become more frequent. He complimented her dress. He touched her shoulder when passing her desk, a second too long. He found reasons to call her into his office in the evenings when no one else was around, then spent time discussing things that had nothing to do with work, his golf games, his travels, a restaurant he had visited in Dubai. She listened politely and exited as quickly as she could without appearing rude. She began wearing less colorful blouses to work. She stopped wearing perfume. She rearranged her desk so she faced the door and could see when people were approaching. These are the adjustments women make, quiet, invisible adjustments, when something is wrong but nothing has yet been said directly. Nothing they can point to. Nothing that can be reported. The morning of the 9th month, on a Tuesday in March, Mr. Rowland called her into his office and asked her to close the door. She did. He was standing at the window, hands behind his back, looking out over the city. The across skyline stretched out behind him, cranes and church spires and the glint of morning sun off rooftops. He turned around slowly and told her, in a calm and measured voice, as if he were discussing a budget line, that he had developed feelings for her. That he found her exceptional, not just as a secretary, but as a woman. He told her he wanted them to be closer. That he was willing to make things very comfortable for her. A raise. A company apartment. Opportunities for advancement. He said all of this as though he were presenting a business proposal. And then he said it. The sentence that split her world in two. He told her that if she was not willing to give him what he wanted, he was not sure the firm still had a place for her. Jennifer stood very still. The air conditioning was running. Somewhere outside the closed door, a phone rang and went unanswered. She could smell his cologne, sharp and expensive, something with cedar in it, and she felt the kind of cold that has nothing to do with temperature. She said nothing for what felt like a very long time. And then she said, quietly but clearly, "I understand." She picked up her notepad from the chair where she had placed it, walked out of his office, sat at her desk, and began to shake. How would you feel, if you were Jennifer in that moment? If the one job that was holding your family together, your mother's medication, your sister's school fees, your father's dignity, was suddenly dangling over a choice you should never have been forced to make? Think about that for a second. Because this is not a story from a movie. This is the story of real women, in real offices, in real cities, right now, today. She did not go home that evening and cry immediately. She sat on the edge of her bed, still in her work clothes, and stared at the photograph above the door for a very long time. Then she took out a small notebook, the kind she used for personal notes, and began to write down everything. Every comment. Every date. Every late evening. Every shoulder touch. The words he had used that morning. She wrote it all down in her careful, meticulous handwriting. She did not know yet what she would do with it. She only knew that she could not let it disappear. Because women like her, from places like Kumasi, with families depending on them, they are not believed easily. They are not taken seriously without proof. And so, she built her proof before she built her case. 3 weeks passed. She came to work every day. She was professional. She was efficient. She avoided being alone with him and managed it with such practiced naturalness that no one seemed to notice. She told only one person, her closest friend, Efua, who worked as a nurse in Koralbu and who had known her since secondary school. Efua wanted her to report it immediately. Go to HR, she said, on the phone at 11 at night, her voice urgent. Jennifer was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Efua, the HR manager is his cousin. The silence on the line said everything. She began researching. Quietly, carefully, the way she did everything. She found out there was a labor commission in Ghana and a process for reporting workplace harassment. She found a non-profit organization in OSU that offered free legal advice to women in employment disputes. She contacted them by email first, then visited on a Saturday morning, wearing her most ordinary clothes, carrying her notebook. The lawyer who saw her, a small, precise woman named Abina Darko, read through the notebook without expression. Then she looked up and said, "You documented everything?" Jennifer said yes. Abina said, Good. Because that is where most women lose. She told Jennifer they had a case. But she also told her the truth: it would be hard, it would take time, and it would almost certainly cost her the job. Jennifer already knew that. She had known it since the moment she began writing in that notebook. She nodded and said she was ready. But ready and prepared are different things. And nothing could have fully prepared her for what came next. 2 months after that Tuesday morning in March, Mr. Rowland called her in again. He told her that her contract was being terminated, citing restructuring within the secretarial division. He seemed calm. Almost apologetic. There was a severance letter already printed and waiting on the desk. She looked at it, then looked at him, and said nothing. She took the letter, thanked him for her time at the company, and walked out. She did not cry. She had already cried every tear she had for this. What she felt walking out of that building for the last time, past the security desk, through the glass doors, into the heat of the Accra afternoon, was something closer to resolve. Her mother called that evening. Jennifer told her she had left the company. Her mother asked why. Jennifer said there had been issues with management. Her mother, who had stood in the Kajisha market reign for 30 years and never once complained, went quiet. Then she said, "Are you safe?" Not, "What happened?" Not, "How will you pay rent?" She asked if her daughter was safe. And that question, in her mother's voice, was what finally broke Jennifer open. She cried that night in a way she had not cried since she was a child, the kind of crying that empties you out completely. She filed the formal complaint 3 weeks later, with Abina by her side. The Labor Commission acknowledged receipt. The process began, slow and grinding and impersonal, full of paperwork and waiting rooms and dates that changed. Mensah and Associates hired a law firm. They submitted documents claiming her dismissal was entirely unrelated to any personal interaction. They presented performance reviews that, suddenly and suspiciously, showed concerns that had never once been raised with Jennifer during her 9 months of employment. This is what institutions do. This is how power protects itself. But Jennifer had her notebook. She had dates. She had the severance letter, which came exactly 61 days after his proposition, a detail Abina noted carefully. She had email records showing her performance had been consistently praised. And there was something else. Something that even Jennifer did not know about until Abina's assistant made a quiet discovery during the documentation process. Roland Mensah had done this before. A young woman named Surwa had worked at the firm 4 years earlier, in a junior accounting role. She had left abruptly after 7 months, under circumstances described only as personal. Abina tracked her down through a former colleague. Surwa was now living in Takoradi, working for a small logistics company, and when Abina called and explained who she was representing, there was a long silence on the line. Then Surwa said, very quietly, "I wondered if this day would ever come." She had never filed a complaint. She had been young, terrified, and far from home. But she was willing to speak now. She was willing to be a witness. Think about what it took for Surwa to answer that call. To reach back into something painful and buried and agree to pull it into the light, not for herself, but for a woman she had never met. There is a particular kind of courage in that, quiet, unspectacular, and real. The case stretched across 7 months. During those 7 months, Jennifer ran out of savings, borrowed money from Efua, and took 2 part-time jobs, one transcribing documents for a legal office downtown, another helping a cousin who ran a small printing business in Dansoman. She kept a detailed budget in a spreadsheet on her phone. She gave herself 20 cedis a day to live on. She did not tell her parents the full truth. She told them the case was progressing and that she was fine. Every Sunday, her father called, and every Sunday she said, "I'm okay, Daddy," and she meant it only partially. There were days she came close to settling. Abina presented one offer from the firm's lawyers, a sum of money, a non-disclosure agreement, a clause that would prevent Jennifer from ever speaking about Roland Mensah or Mensah and Associates publicly. "It would help you right now," Abina said, "not as a recommendation but as information." Jennifer sat with it for 2 days. She thought about her mother's hands. She thought about Surwa's voice on the phone. She thought about the women who came after her, whoever they would be, walking into that glass building with their lanyards and their hope. She called Abina and said, "We're not taking the offer." The hearing at the Labor Commission happened on a Thursday morning in November, 11 months after that Tuesday in March. Jennifer wore the same suit she had worn to her job interview at Mensah and Associates. She had pressed it the night before with an iron borrowed from her neighbor. She arrived early. She sat in the waiting room with her hands folded in her lap and breathed slowly. Abina sat beside her. Surwa had come from Takoradi by overnight bus and was sitting 2 seats down, looking tired and steady and present. Roland Mensah arrived with 2 lawyers and did not make eye contact with Jennifer. She noticed that his tie was slightly crooked. That detail lodged itself in her memory, the way small details do when everything else is loud. They went in. The hearing lasted most of the day. Evidence was presented. Surwa gave her statement. Jennifer answered questions in a calm, clear voice. She had rehearsed nothing, she simply told the truth, in order, from the beginning, the way she had written it in her notebook. The ruling came 14 days later, delivered in a document that Abina called her about on a Monday morning. Jennifer was at the printing shop in Dansaman, running copies of a school brochure, when her phone rang. She stepped outside into the noise of the street, a bus passing, a hawker calling out, a child crying somewhere nearby, and Abina's voice came through the phone and told her that the commission had found in her favor. Unfair dismissal. Workplace harassment. Mensah and Associates was ordered to pay compensation. Roland Mensah was formally sanctioned. The ruling was a matter of public record. Jennifer stood on that street, in the midday heat, with the smell of ink still on her hands, and said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "Thank you, Abina." And then she went back inside and finished the copies, because the order was due before noon. She called her mother that evening. This time, she told her everything, from the beginning, from that first late evening, to the September morning she walked out through the glass doors, to the day Surwa got on an overnight bus. Her mother listened without interrupting. When Jennifer was done, her mother said, in Chui, something that translates roughly as, "I raised you right." Just that. No fanfare. No long speech. For words from a woman who had sold fabric in the rain for 30 years, and it was enough to fill every empty space that 11 months had carved out. Roland Mensah resigned from the firm 6 weeks after the ruling. Privately, insiders said the board had made it clear that remaining was not in anyone's interest. The company released a brief public statement about leadership transition. His name disappeared quietly from the website. The glass office on the 14th floor got a new occupant, a woman, as it turned out, a senior partner who had been with the firm for 12 years. Jennifer read about it in a brief industry notice shared in a WhatsApp group for Ghanaian finance professionals. Jennifer herself got a job 4 months after the ruling, at a mid-sized investment firm in Airport City, hired as an operations coordinator. It paid more than her previous job. Her desk was on the 9th floor, not the 14th, and the office did not have glass walls. But on her first morning, she took the lift up, walked to her desk, and placed a small photograph in the corner of her workspace, her family, all of them together, taken at a cousin's wedding 2 years earlier. Her mother in a bright Kent cloth, her father in a borrowed agbada, her siblings squinting into the sun and laughing. And here is what nobody saw, because it happened in a quiet moment before the rest of the floor arrived that morning. Jennifer sat at her new desk, touched the corner of that photograph, and took a long, slow breath. Not a dramatic breath. Not a movie breath. The quiet kind that means you've carried something heavy for a long time and you've finally set it down. She opened her laptop, connected to the company system, and began to work. As for Surwa, she went back to Takoradi on a Friday evening bus. Jennifer sent her a short message that night, "I don't have the right words. But you changed everything." Surwa replied with 2 sentences, "I should have spoken sooner. I'm glad you gave me the chance." They have never met in person. But they speak on the phone sometimes, on ordinary evenings, about ordinary things. And what about you? Sitting where you are right now, watching this, have you ever stayed silent about something that was done to you, because you did not think you would be believed? Have you ever made small, invisible adjustments to protect yourself from something that should never have been your burden to manage? Or maybe you know someone like Jennifer, someone who carried a weight that should have been put on someone else's shoulders. Think about them. Think about what it cost them. Think about what it costs, every single day, when the people with power decide that their comfort matters more than someone else's dignity. Jennifer's story is not rare. That is the hardest part of it. It happens in offices in Accra and Lagos and Nairobi and everywhere in between. It happens to women who are excellent at their jobs, who are grateful and careful and professional, and who did nothing to invite what was done to them. It happens to women who are believed and to women who are not. It happens and it is absorbed quietly into the fabric of everyday life, like heat, like noise, like the trotro packed too tight in the morning, something endured because what else do you do? But Jennifer did something else. She took out a notebook. She wrote things down in careful handwriting. She found 1 lawyer and 1 old friend and 1 woman in Takoradi who was willing to remember. And she refused a check. That is not a movie ending. It is something better. It is a real one. Let us know in the comments, what part of this story stayed with you the most? Was it Jennifer's decision to refuse the settlement? Surwa's choice to speak up after 4 years? Or her mother's 4 words at the end of that phone call? We read every comment, and we genuinely want to know. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is make sure a story like this doesn't stay quiet. If you're new here, click the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. We'll be back with another story very soon.